Welcome to another edition of That Time When. Matt Miller with you. This is the podcast series where we take you through the archive here at Trekzone. Today, as we're progressing down the list of all the podcasts that we've done, we're up to 2018 and that time when we assessed the status of Axanar. Well, it's been 6 months since today's guest joined me. It is, of course, Carlos Pedraza, and he's at home for me today. Carlos, thanks for your time.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Now, the State of Axanar. We keep coming back to this, despite the fact that the lawsuit's been over for over 12 months now. What's happened? What's happened now?
Well, the lawsuit is over, but Axanar is not over. I would love to have to stop covering Axanar, but the reality is, and I've said this before, that they're gearing up to raise more money to produce the two Axanar short films, and that money is coming from people, and people deserve to know what the history of this project, the history of Alec Peters, what he's said, the discrepancies and the things that he talks about. They deserve to know all of that before making an informed choice about whether or not to invest yet another hundreds of thousands of dollars into a project that couldn't get made after having successfully raised $1.4 million.
Now, this has all sort of come about in the last few weeks because at the start of the month, Alec and a few people from Axanar went to a convention of sorts at an Atlanta shopping centre where he said some very interesting things which we're going to dissect through today. What was your highlight from that panel discussion?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that Peters says once the article came out was that I didn't say anything I haven't said in other venues on my blog and so forth. But the reality is that, there's a lot of stuff that he said, and but there's discrepancies that have come up between what he said in the past and what he's saying now. And there's the whole troubling notion that somehow that persists out in the world that Star Trek Discovery was inspired by or took ideas from Axanar, and that Axanar is the reason why we have Discovery, when that's not true at all. And while he doesn't make that claim, he neatly tees it up for an audience to be like, well, I don't know, but I do know that Brian Fuller is a big fan of Axanar, when in fact he's not, but so that's the kind of stuff that I cover. I mean, a lot of Axanar supporters think that what I'm trying to do is uncover some sort of conspiracy, when in fact all I'm doing is documenting what he says and what he does, so that when the time comes for them to raise money, people have open eyes about what they're giving their money to and who they're giving their money to. That was my purpose in covering that speech, that panel discussion, to see what he had to say about how soon production is starting and what that production looks like, where it's going to take place, and how it relates to other fan films. And he covered all those topics neatly during that panel discussion, and so that's what I reported.
The thing I'm fascinated by is the fact that he keeps name dropping. So apparently Jason Isaacs and Doug Jones were tapped to be in Axanar. There's Brian Fuller was a big supporter of Axanar. Justin Lin and J.J. Abrams apparently were big supporters of Axanar as well. What's with the name dropping, do you think?
Well, it's a very Hollywood thing. The more names you can drop, the more credible you come across. And following the lawsuit, in which Axanar and Alec Peters took a big hit on their credibility, following the loss of their studio, in which he sunk $750,000 of donors' money into building, and not a frame of Axanar was ever shot inside that studio. All of these things took a toll on his credibility and his project's credibility. And so he's been working to rebuild that credibility over the course of the last year. And part of that is being able to say publicly that he's connected in some way to these people whom his audience they know who they are, and they respect them, and he is able to draw respectability through his connection. But in point of fact, if you parse the way he talks about all of it, in the case of Jason Isaacs, he never even talked to Jason Isaacs. He just says, again, after the fact, that he was interested in getting Jason Isaacs cast in Axanar. He never says which role, and this is the first time we've ever heard of it. What he says is that his girlfriend knows someone who knows him. So, I mean, that's like 3 degrees of separation. And I've got 3 degrees of separation from almost anyone famous in the world. So that's a non-story, but he gets to drop the name of a well-regarded Star Trek actor. Similarly with Doug Jones, Peter's probably has met. Doug Jones is very fan friendly. He's been in almost everything. So I have no doubt that he talked to him, but how close that came to actually being cast is left completely vague and ambiguous, because of course that isn't the point. The point is to rebuild credibility, and so the more names he drops, the more credibility is built. At least that's how the theory goes. And finally, with Brian Fuller, and we debunked this a year ago, that he keeps claiming that Brian Fuller is a big Axanar fan, and in reality, I mean, Brian Fuller was directly asked, before Discovery premiered, is the event that Discovery was based on, that's referred to in the original series, is that event Axanar? And Brian Fuller said directly, I don't really have any idea about the history of Axanar, making it quite clear that Axanar doesn't really mean anything to him, and and he's a sufficiently creative guy, Brian Fuller, that he doesn't have to steal ideas from a copyright infringing fan film.
And a lawyer in training who came up with the expanded idea.
Well, I mean, the idea, remember, comes directly from another licensed property, the FASA Star Trek game. That's remains the inspiration. In the tape of the panel discussion, Alec Peters refers to the Klingon War that we came up with. I'm like, no, I think actually that Klingon War was come up with by a licensed Star Trek vendor, FASA, and he took that idea. So it's not an original idea he came up with. Garth is an original. The Klingon War is an original. The time setting is an original. He keeps trying to draw some kind of connection between the time Discovery is set in, the time Axanar is set in, and saying they're in the same time frame. When the reality is they're not. They're in the same time frame as the fictional Prelude was fictionally produced in a fictional universe 10 years after the fact. So the events portrayed in Prelude actually happened 10 years before Prelude is set. So that's 10 years before Discovery and its version of a Klingon War. So he keeps describing it as somehow two alternate visions of the same universe when it's set at the same time, when in fact Discovery is set as far away from his Axanar world as Discovery is set from the original series.
Well, let's move on to one of the many comments that he made, but this one in particular in regards to the lawsuit, where he said that CBS and Paramount missed the bigger picture of Axanar and what could have been told. It sounds as though he wanted to be the pre-show entertainment to Star Trek movies. Was that ever going to happen, even if it wasn't a fan film? do you think?
Well, no, that's just not the way that it works. I mean, his point that doing something like that would break the Hollywood paradigm. Well, sure, but there's a lot of things that would break the Hollywood paradigm that aren't necessarily a good idea commercially. And so if the point is just trying to disrupt things, you have to go further, which is his claim that it would have made Star Trek more money to have gone down that road. But we have no idea if that's the case. I mean, he just sort of presumes that fans love Axanar, therefore more fans would come to have seen Star Trek Beyond. We have no idea if that's the case. I mean, we do know that the fan film audience is a niche of a niche of a niche. So would we really have seen that many more butts in seats in theaters for Star Trek Beyond? I don't know. Do you know? Does he know? Is there any evidence one way or the other? No, there's not. Not to mention the fact that it raises all kinds of legal issues. The idea that on an ongoing basis, fans produce things and CBS or Paramount buy them and then use them to make money on their own. I expect a lot of unions out there would have issues with that. If the ultimate goal is to for a major network that should be paying union rates for everything from crew to cast and writers and so forth, is essentially getting it made on the cheap because they've kind of outsourced it to fans, and then it puts fan films, which are supposed to be a labor of love, into a very tricky financial and legal position should the studios have embraced Axanar in the way that Alec Peters suggests. They're all major hurdles, and without any compelling evidence that it would pay off for CBS or Paramount, it's just speculation. It's red meat to his fans who believe that, if CBS had just bought Axanar, then all the problems of the world would have been solved.
Well, I think it is absolutely embarrassing for Alec Peters that I can run that episode from 2018 and it is still current. There is still 0% of Axanar, the final product, to show for any of his work, any of his bitching and whining and whatever the hell else he is doing. He's doing everything except actually making a fan film when others can get in and get it done. People like Aaron Vanderklay, who can come on the show in January and say, I'm making a fan film, then come back on the show in May and say, here's my fan film. Just incredible that other people can do it. Alec Peters just seems to be the problem. He can't produce. As Emmett Plant said this on a Trekzone conversation recently, he is a cosplay producer, someone that dresses up like them, but doesn't actually do the job. Well, if you are giving money to Alec and you've gotten sick of no results, what about you give it to me instead? For $4 a month, you can become a member of Trekzone and you will get early access to every single one of the podcasts that we produce as soon as it is uploaded to the channel. Plus, you'll get behind-the-scenes goss of the latest happenings around the place. Like, for instance, coming up in a couple of weeks, our Canberra road trip, you'll get behind-the-scenes access to exactly what goes into making the podcasts in a Trekzone style. That, of course, is Trekzone membership for less than a cup of coffee a month. 1 cup of coffee a month, if you can spare that. Jump on and become a Trekzone member. As I say, the Trekzone/support, or click join on any of the Trekzone videos here on YouTube. For now, and as always, I'm Matt Miller for Trekzone.
Keep up to date with Twitter. Catch new podcasts daily on YouTube. Plus, we're beaming to your favorite podcast app 5 days a week. Just search for Trekzone and subscribe.